Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're continuing on from the video I did last night on Simon and Garfunkel with their 1981 performance of The Sound of Silence by having a look at the Disturbed cover version of that same track. And just to give you warning, I am going to be stopping this video during the performance just to explain a few things. So if you want to watch it the whole way through, the link is going to be in the description below, so you guys can do that. But this is from the 2016 performance on The Conan Show over in the USA. So let's get David and the guys up on screen and the orchestra and see how they get on.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stared by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs and voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence.
I'm just going to jump in here. First of all, just to mention the arrangement, everything that's going on in the background, because we've got that dynamic journey that I'm always talking about with great live performances. Here we've got that advantage of the orchestra coming in, and listen to the way that the strings just bleed in the background. It is so well arranged and well played by everybody involved, but in order to take you on that journey, musically, something that's going on here, when we listen to the original track, of course, we've got two people singing. So it means that David Draymond, by the way, here on lead vocals, is taking on the job of two vocalists at once. And this is the reason why he has to have such a wide range throughout this whole performance and go up by over an octave is something that I always mention about singers when they have the ability to take their vocals up just one octave, which is quite a lot in terms of singing a melody of a song and getting that crescendo and getting that emotional response from the listeners, because you've gone to a totally different place pitch-wise and emotionally within the voice. Here, David goes up even more than that, but we'll get to that in a second. But he's got to be able to do that in order to cover both vocal parts that are being sung by two people on that original song. As I'm mentioning about the journey and pitch and notes, we might as well get into it straight away, because David here is starting on an F-sharp 2, so you can go and find that on your keyboard if you want to, if you've got one that has enough keys. He then goes all the way up to A4 in terms of that top note that he hits when he really starts leaning into his vocal sound. We're yet to get there in this particular performance, that leaned in vocal sound. But having that range, I always say 1 octave is a really dramatic vocal to put down in terms of giving you that light and shade and taking people on a journey. Here, we've got over 2 octaves that David is spanning with his voice. So by the time we get to that top note, the journey has been so long and so interesting along the way and ever changing that when we hit that note, it just blows you away. The other thing about how David achieves that is his ability to control the rasp in his voice. He's got great vocal technique in order to sing with the low notes in his range really clearly. He can also take that up into a clean head voice sound if he wants to, but he can still hit those same head voice notes in chest voice with rasp, and we're going to be getting into that a little bit later. This is the thing about David's voice, coming from that heavy metal background and having all of those techniques in there to get a really dirty tone if he wants it. He can also revert back to that super clean tone. And it shows a mastery of vocal technique in order to do that. And once you've got the ability to do that, it means that you can take people on such a journey just with your voice. Even if you're singing in the same range the whole time, you can change the sound of your voice, the expression of the voice, and give it slightly different tonal qualities as you progress through a particular composition. But here, that increase in pitch is also added to the different textures that David gives you with his vocal cords, and that's what makes it so interesting the whole way through. Of course, we've got to mention Paul Simon and the original composition, and the way that the song can be interpreted by a different band and different artists to sound totally different, but still connect to an audience because that composition, the message of the song is so strong. And if you want to watch Simon and Garfunkel playing this particular song live, check out the other video that I did on them. I'm not going to be getting into the composition in this video in terms of Paul Simon, but we're going to be getting into the performance elements that we can see. At this point, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, and all the producers out there watching will know what I'm about to say. It's the auto-tune on the vocal. And I've seen a lot of discussions and arguments, particularly about this performance, saying that it's auto-tuned, and other people say, no, it's not auto-tuned. This is just what a great singer sounds like. And it is definitely auto-tuned. If you've got any history in production, if you're a half-decent producer, you can tell auto-tune a mile off. But anyway, the auto-tune that is placed on David's voice here is nothing to do with the band or David, because David is a producer himself, so he knows there is auto-tune on this, and he wasn't aware that it was going to be added. When he watched the performance back, he then noticed, because he's a top-level producer, that there was auto-tune on the voice. So it's something that was put on in post-production, it wasn't there live, and it's something that unfortunately tends to happen with TV shows. There's a default to put it through auto-tune, and it just so happens that it was too late to change once it's been uploaded to the internet, and everyone goes crazy about the performance, and it gets uploaded everywhere else to lots of other sites. You can't then rewind time and un-auto-tune the lead vocal. So unfortunately, we've got to listen to it with the auto-tune on. The irony is that David is the last guy that needs auto-tune. His voice is immense. And while I say that, if you've seen the Live in Houston video, the live performance with Miles Kennedy, they absolutely kill it, and there's no hint of auto-tune on that. So go to that video, this same song obviously, but performed with Miles Kennedy. It is such a great performance. The other thing about auto-tune, I'm not going to turn this into a rant about auto-tune, it's just a bit depressing when it gets applied to singers that by no means need it at all. When you listen to a fantastic singer, auto-tune erases the tiny bits of expression that they have in their voice. There are incidental qualities that are so minute, but they set apart the good singers from the great singers and the legendary singers. Those ones that connect on such a deep level. It's these tiny details they have in their voice that you hear before a note and ending a note and going into a note, sliding in and sliding out of a note. These are the things that auto-tune erases because it snaps it to the note. So when people say about music nowadays being emotionless, it is because so much is auto-tuned. The emotion of the performance is like being erased by a virtual eraser so that you don't get the expression of the artist through the voice because it's being put through a machine first before you hear it, and then it sounds mechanical. I just want to throw this in there as well. When I mentioned that it was ironic that they've applied it to David Draymond's voice, the ultimate irony is that David was singing well before auto-tune became a mainstream thing. Cher in 1998 was the artist that brought it to everybody's attention, and then it just skyrocketed and everyone started using it. But David was singing well before that in 96, I think 97, when he was with Disturbed. Disturbed, by the way, started in 1994. So when we're talking about vocal technique and also David being a singer who applies that rasp and it's almost vocal distortion, the amount that he can add to it, think about how long he's been singing and how consistent his voice still is. He has got that perfect technique in order to apply that rasp, but without shredding his vocal cords. Another thing that David does here vocally that's interesting for this performance is that his vibrato borders on tremolo in terms of the way that he applies it. And when I say tremolo, that is something where you decrease and increase the volume. And when you talk about vibrato, that is something where the pitch of the note changes. So some people do call it tremolo vibrato, but it can get really confusing when you start combining those two terms. Tremolo, classically, if you think of the Bee Gees, they used tremolo in their voices to make it sound like vibrato. So they went, ha, ha, ha. So they're getting a break in the vocal cords. They're going, ha, 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 ha. So when you hear the note, that is the vocal cords connecting. Vibrato will be, ha, and there's no gaps of air in there. And that's why if you're trying to hold a note for a long time and you're doing tremolo with your vocal cords, they're splitting apart and you're letting all of your air go. Air is such a precious commodity when you're singing, so it means that your note will never last very long because you're just exhaling all of the air that you need to maintain a long note. Anyway, like I said, David is just dancing on the edge of that technique, and it might have been the fact that when he was performing this, he did have a cold. Maybe that's why people thought they had to put auto-tune on it, because if someone's got a cold, it must mean that it's rubbish even if it sounds great. But anyway, if he has a cold, connecting those vocal cords might have been a little bit more difficult, and that's why a little bit more air is just escaping through the cords because he wasn't well at the time. It's just an interesting sound, and also, if he was applying a wide vibrato, you can't really apply auto-tune to a wide vibrato because it covers too much pitch. The auto-tune will snap it to the note above and the note below, and it sounds comical when you hear that, and it's the reason why classical singers are never auto-tuned, because auto-tune cannot deal with their vibrato. It's just too wide. I've mentioned about vibrato in other videos, about you can go above the note, you can go below the note, and classical singers tend to go so wide with that, trying to put that into auto-tune, it will just crash because it won't know which note to try and snap it to. If David hit this with a really wide vibrato, it would damage the connection to the lyrics and the song. And that's something that can happen sometimes with the overuse of vibrato, and especially covering a hell of a lot of pitch with that vibrato. But David keeps the pop elements of this performance being traditionally a folk style song, the connection, and not a classical song with a wide vibrato, like I said. He's kept the pop elements in there, but applied his heavy metal vocal techniques towards the end of the song. And without further ado, let's get back into the song so we can really see where David leans into his vocals.
Full say that you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. silence.
And there we have it. The absolute giveaway to the efficiency of David's voice is his mic technique. Rewind it all the way back to the beginning of the performance and look at how far away he is from the microphone, and then fast forward it to when he's leaning into his sound. He's got that really raspy tone to his voice, so much attitude, but look at where he is in relation to the mic. He's in exactly the same place. And this is why guys like David can sing with such a heavy sounding voice for 20 plus years, because he is producing this sound with minimal air and ultimate efficiency. It's something to look out for when you're watching hard rock, metal, heavy metal singers. The guys that might have been around 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and now they can't sing the same way. They've lost their notes. They've done vocal damage. The reason that happens is because back in the day, when they had to hit a high note, they would be miles away from the microphone because the amount of air and force they needed to hit that note. And then when you watch them sing in their lower range, they're really close up to the microphone, whereas top singers like David have got the ability to hit the high notes in their range with the same ease and control as the low notes. So there's no need to be far away from that mic, because he's not now suddenly belting it out at a really loud volume. It's all the same volume. When you hear such an aggressive sound, you assume it has got to be loud because the vocal cords sound like they're straining. And that's what happens when you put lots of air through it and when you're shouting at somebody and you're emotional. That is what happens. You're potentially doing vocal cord damage when you get angry and you start shouting. But great singers like David can achieve that same emotion with minimal air and volume. And the mic position in relation to the mouth is the giveaway to how great David's technique is. This is the thing about when you're listening to a great singer, especially one who's had a long career, you've got to spend a little bit of time just respecting them for looking after themselves and their voice for so long and putting in so much practice to make their technique so efficient, because this is the kind of sound that if he was doing it wrong would have shredded his vocal cords probably 10, 15 years ago, but because of his technique and his discipline, he can still nail this night after night. To finish with, I just want to mention a couple of things about David's voice that I haven't mentioned so far that are really important elements to his voice. And the first one is his consistent sound throughout his range. So he's got this depth of tone that he maintains at the low end of his range. As he gets to mid-range, it's the same tone. It's got the same body to it. As he then gets higher in his range, he's obviously, from a vocal technique perspective, thinning out the sound. That has to happen. But he's not losing any of the original tone. So if he goes from the lowest note in his range to the highest note, it will be a consistent voice. And that's something that sometimes when a singer hits a high note that is really high in their range, it sounds different to the voice they were singing with in their lower range. But having that consistent sound, again, is a sign of a top voice and a voice that has been trained, that it's so under control throughout all of those notes. While I'm talking about the range, the second point is the high note in this performance is an A4. And those of you that do sing and know pitches, if you are a musician, you might know the pitches on your guitar. That A4 is not a super high note. We're talking about being under C5 here, obviously, and that high C is the holy grail of the note that for some reason everybody wants to hit as a male tenor voice in that range. But having this A4 as the high note just shows how low David starts, but also what a journey he takes you on, because you would expect the high note in this performance to be really high because it's so dramatic. But you have to go to a piano or to a guitar to find where this note actually is, this high note. And then you realize, oh, actually, that isn't that high, but it felt like it was really high. And that's the point. You sing for your range. So many singers try and sing in the range of other people, and therefore when they try and reach that top note, they can't get it, or when they do hit it, it sounds awful because they're straining and it sounds like a really weird voice, like a cat being strangled. But if you make sure your high note is at the end of the song and within your range, and you've built up to that, you'll always get that dramatic emotional reaction from the audience because you are hitting that note with confidence, and people can tap into the confidence of the note. And that's exactly what David is doing throughout this performance. Once you add in the arrangement, all of the different instruments, it's a standalone performance. And I would argue that if you get a chance, check out the performance with Miles Kennedy, because that's without auto-tune, and in my opinion, David is even better without auto-tune. All of the tiny details you get from his voice just shine when it isn't put through that mechanical process. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!